Hi, everyone. Thank you so
Hello.
much for joining us. I'm so excited you're here for today's conversation on decentralizing nonprofit leadership models beyond the ED. My name is Nicole Jamerzinski, and I'm joining you on behalf of the nonprofit Hive. Normally, these LinkedIn Lives are hosted by the brilliant Tasha Van Black, but I'm stepping in to facilitate today, which honestly feels very on brand for this session. It's a small example of what shared leadership can look like in practice. First off, thank you for joining us. Whether you're watching live or catching the replay, we'd love to know who's in the room with us. So feel free to drop in the comments where you're tuning in from and what organization you're with. It's always amazing to see the range of folks who show up for these conversations. So thank you so much for joining. Today, we're diving into what it means to move beyond traditional top-down leadership structures and hearing directly from the nonprofit leaders who are experimenting with co-leadership, shared decision-making, and more collaborative ways of working. It's not always clean or easy, but it's incredibly powerful. We'll be posing a few core questions to the group, and each speaker will have a chance to share their reflections. But before we get into the questions, let's start with a quick round of intros. I'll hand it off to each of our speakers to share who they are, a bit about their work, and what drew them to this conversation. So let's get started with Kamilah.
Hi, my name is Kamilah Francis. I'm the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Anti-Racism Manager, currently with Compass, Boussole. I previously was in a role as the Executive Director of Future North, a small grassroots nonprofit organization that supported youth, and that is kind of the lens I'm kind of bringing to this conversation today.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. Danette, over to you.
Hi, my name is Danette O'Connell. I'm the Executive Director of the Nonprofit Cooperative, and I am excited to be here today and just decentralizing nonprofits. Our management has changed my life. So, and we're going to talk about that more in a bit.
Love it. And Rachel, please.
Hi, I'm Rachel Reynolds. I carry a couple different roles. I'm based out of Richmond, Virginia. My full-time job, I'm the Assistant Director of Operations at the Virginia Mental Health Access Program, or VMAP. And then I'm also the Volunteer Managing Director for CJ's Thumbs Up Foundation, which is a very small nonprofit. And I was drawn to this conversation because I'm using some of these models on both the micro side and with much larger programs. And so it's really interesting to have the perspective kind of from both ends of program development.
I love it. It's going to be a great combo. Thank you again for joining. So we'll just jump into the first question here. So decentralized leadership often emerges out of necessity, especially in smaller grassroots organizations. In your experience, what sparked a shift toward shared or collaborative leadership, whether in your own work or the organization you're supporting? And how can necessity-driven models become long-term strength rather than a stopgap? Rachel, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to talk mainly for this question about how this has looked in the VMAP program. And with that program, so our program is a state-funded and federally funded program. So we have braided funds from a lot of different sources. And we, in my role, our organization is the contract administrator for the state. So what that means is that we are managing the program for the state. It's about a $14 million program, but we have contracts with about 30 different entities across the state to make that work happen. And those entities are subcontracted to about 100 different people. So what happens in this situation is that we are leaders to direct the program, but we're not necessarily the direct supervisors or employers of all of these folks who are making the work happen. So it really requires a lot of collaboration and a lot of consensus-driven governance where we're working with an executive committee, a leadership team, but we're not making all of these decisions in a very hierarchical, I'm the boss, and then it's going to trickle down to our different programs and aspects of our programs. So that's really what that looks like for us. And we've had to think very differently about what the collaboration looks like with our programs.
That's amazing. I'm sure it was an interesting challenge or dynamic to get to that space, but I'm really excited to hear more about that. Thanks for sharing that, Rachel. Kamilah, over to you.
For sure. So when I think about what kind of sparked a shift towards shared or collaborative leadership, and I'm coming from, again, previously in my role, kind of what we worked with was youth. And so what we did was we had a collective youth impact, where, again, I think similar to kind of what you shared, it was a bunch of different organizations situated across the country that were coming together to have a collective impact in how we're engaging youth across the country. And so what we had was a leadership table in our region. And so different leaders from different organizations, we all sat at this leadership table and we're working together on a shared plan of how can we appropriately engage youth in our community and how are we doing that collaboratively. When I think about what sparked that, I think it always comes down to like breaking silos and that we're all kind of working separately and working alone. And, there's this common goal that we're all trying to achieve, but we're all working very independently trying to achieve it. So no one knows who's doing what. And instead we wanted to come together and be able to synergize our efforts and be like, okay, how can we make sure that we're, using the funding that we all have, which is, sometimes dispersed and some people have a little bit more than others, but how can we make sure that we're using it in a way that's actually effective and at the end of the day, serving those people that we say we're trying to serve, right? So how can we make best use of that is kind of where I think for me, it's like, that's why we're moving towards that.
I love it. I know working with youth can be, you really always want to bring their voices along into the conversation and the decision-making models. So I love that approach, especially when working with youth and trying to honor and celebrate them. Danette, over to you.
Yeah, so we're a smaller nonprofit organization. So there's only 3 of us. So it came down to divide and conquer. Right. And that's easier said than done. I'm the founder and the executive director. So this is like my vision and my baby. And some people will find that, when their founders are, they started up that nonprofit, they sometimes don't want to let go and let people help. And even if you're small, it is critical for you to be able to do that, because now that I've been able to do that, and it took me a while to build trust with people who are within our organization to allow them to join collaboratively. But let me tell you, I get so much more done now that I have done that. And even though we're small, you can't control everything. So, for the smaller organizations out there, this is critical. Now I can fundraise. Now I can get new members and really help with, the higher stuff. And it's all about trust. It's about, empowering everybody in your organization. And once you do that, then it's a game changer for you.
I think you said a keyword there, and it was trust. Trusting, you need to trust everybody in these models, and trust that they're going to get the work done and holding themselves accountable. So I think there's a whole component there that we can really dive into just in that space alone. So just to the next question, what qualities, practices, or mindsets do you look for or try to model when it comes to decentralized or shared leadership? How do you spot or support leaders who are really trying to walk the talk? Kamilah, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yes, absolutely. So some of the things when I think of qualities, in particular, I think of humility. So, when looking at decentralized leadership, shared leadership, it really comes down to, I don't know it all and I don't claim to know it all. I can't do it all and I don't claim to do it all. I have a special set of skills that I'm, very good at. And there's certain things that I'm not so good at. And I can own up to that and say, you know what, I need support in these areas with people that are experts in those kind of areas. And so it really comes down to humility, knowing what your own limits are and knowing yourself and knowing kind of where you can fill some of those gaps with other leaders and other people that have those skills in those areas. So really thinking about it from that lens. But the other piece to that is, and I kind of said it already previously, but thinking about, who are we actually serving and how can we, put them first, amplify them, have them kind of be the center of what we're trying to do. And kind of that equity piece in there, right? So equity, inclusion, having those voices be the center around what we're all trying to achieve.
I love that. I think there's a lot with like value alignment pieces there. Everybody in these models, they really align themselves with the organization's mission, and they understand their roles and they know that they're great at them. And it's everybody around them knows that they're also great at that role. So I love that concept that you're sharing. Rachel, over to you.
Yeah. Just to pick up on that, I had that on my list as well. That values-driven leadership and values alignment, I think, is something that's really important to that conversation and that collaborative process. Because, like others have said, we all come at the project or the program from different perspectives. And even when we're leading with the same values, there can be different perspectives of what that means to lead with those values. So it's important to continually have those kinds of conversations with your leaders who are involved in this work. I think that also what comes to mind for me with doing a lot of this work is servant leadership qualities. Just that idea of, like Kamilah was saying, leading with humility, leading with that idea that no one person is going to know it all or be able to do it all, and also being able to kind of dig in and see those other perspectives. I think that really lends itself to productive work. I think also being willing and able to sit with ambiguity. There's a lot of times where, people want you, especially as a leader, to come up with the right answer or just kind of say, what do you do? And a lot of times our team, when we throw it back at them and say, well, what do you think we should be doing? What do you think is the right answer? And they're like, oh my goodness, you want my opinion? Like, you're the boss, you should be telling me. And I think that's been an adjustment for our team. But to be able to sit in that and say, hey, let's figure it out, let's do this together, let's try something and see if it works, and if it doesn't, we're going to reevaluate and we're going to do it differently. I think that is definitely something that works well in this space, particularly for nonprofits. And it like I said, I think it can be an adjustment for folks who may have had a history of working differently in other programs or organizations.
Yeah, that hierarchy approach doesn't always align or allow you to get feedback from staff and actually incorporate it into the work. So I love that kind of full circle approach for people to be able to incorporate and really see themselves in the work that they're doing. Danette, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yes, and I wholeheartedly believe what Rachel said. So it's really important to just ask everybody for their opinion because look, you don't know everything. Nobody knows everything, right? So just getting their feedback, and like if I come up with a new program, I'm like, what do you guys think? What is there anything that I'm missing? I do this with our board and our staff, and really get them engaged to be able to give the feedback and give me some ideas, right? And we build so many wonderful programs by this model, and just really getting them engaged. And then not only that, when you're asking them our opinion and you do this collaboratively, they feel ownership then, and they'll be able to jump in more, and they know what's going on and things like that. So everybody on our team knows a little bit about everything so that they can jump in. And we really put this through the test as I have had to take some time off. And are you guys okay? Or like we had a big summit and my internet went out. And I was like, oh, thank God she knows everything because I'd be in some serious trouble right now. I mean, it went off for a whole day and it was terrible on my end. I'm freaking out, but she did wonderful. Everybody even said what a wonderful job she did. So, when you collaborate like that, it helps all around.
I love that. That sounds like my worst nightmare. I come from the events background, so like losing my internet, like, oh no. But the joy, and it is so important to have your team and that feedback loop, like constantly keeping everybody informed so people can jump in, is I think really crucial to the events world, but also to these decentralized leadership discussions. And I think that also allows people to really create their own or offer their own decision-making processes if they are informed on what the direction the organization's going, and like they have the knowledge and understanding of what the goals are. I think they can be better informed to also make those decisions. So they have the autonomy and the authority to do it themselves as well, which I think is a really interesting piece. Danette, you said something about buy-in, and I think this ties in really nicely to our next question around what impact has leadership had on internal culture, fundraising, or decision making in your context? Has it created more buy-in, more complexity, or what are some visible benefits or trade-offs you've seen? And Danette, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, the impact has been wonderful because once you start involving other people, then they're able to, help out and free you up to do, like it's freed me up to do more fundraising, more memberships, and the higher end things. But not that they can't do those things, right? And so there's times where they've had to jump in and meet with a new member or a funder. So it really helps to do that, especially if something unexpectedly happens within your organization. Then they can pick up wherever you've left off. And plus, it just brings in great ideas. Also, something that you may not have thought about because sometimes you're so close to it that you don't see everything, right? But allowing them to make the decisions to move forward is also freeing. Then you're not getting, can I move forward with this? Can I do this? Can I do just here's the keys, here's the power, right? And then we discuss it. And if something does not go right, then we discuss how in the future we can make it right. So, everybody makes mistakes and it's completely okay. I make them, everybody makes them. So even if they do make a mistake or made a decision that wasn't what you wished it to be, it's okay. You just talk about it, and then in the future it doesn't happen again. And this has made a wonderful impact on us. And then I don't have to be in the loop on every single thing that goes on within the organization. I don't need to know all of that, right? I just need to know that it got done, right? So, and then like sometimes later I'll go look at something and I see, oh, I wish I was able to change that. And it's taken me a while to let go of that, right? Like it doesn't matter. It didn't make a big impact change. So don't worry about it, right? I may have worded something different or changed the graphic to be a little bit different, but at the end of the day, you just gotta let go, and not worry about all those little things, because those little things, if that green circle in my background is a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, does it make a difference? It doesn't, right? Just let somebody make that decision and move forward. It may not be perfect the way that you like it, but it's okay. At the end of the day, it's not life-changing, right? So like nobody noticed that little green mark wanted to be moved, right? So, and it's just letting go and collaborate and move forward.
I love that. I am not a perfectionist. So, and in the event space, I don't feel like you ever can be a perfectionist because you will have a very frustrating time throughout that entire ordeal. But I love the idea that, if you allow people to make the decisions, you also get some really beautiful and innovative approaches to things that you would have never thought of. Very much what you said. Like, I just think there could be some hiccups along the way, but those hiccups, if you talk about it, also creates an opportunity to even build something better. So I love this collaborative idea and really having honest discussions. I think that's a big part of it too, is just the honesty around these conversations and knowing that it's not going to be perfect and being okay with that and knowing that there's opportunities for this to be organic and to grow into something that's really meaningful for everybody across the board.
Communication.
Rachel, that's it. So many comments about that I have toddler twins and I regularly need to think about my communication skills because they do not always understand. Rachel, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, just to echo, I just feel myself nodding to all of these things that everyone's saying. It's so validating. But I think one of the things that we have seen in our organization from a culture perspective is that buy-in from the top down. And, people just, when they're engaged in these conversations, they feel involved in a way that I've not experienced in organizations that were more hierarchical or had more bureaucratic structures. And I think that is so the feedback we get from our team members who say how engaged they feel in the work, how involved, how they feel like their opinions and their thoughts are valued. That is really validating to me as the leader. And I think that one of the things that we have learned is how this growth really, as your organization grows or as your team grows, you really have to think about what happens at those growth points. You've always got those points where it's like, something's changed, we've got to adjust a little bit. And I can give you a couple of quick examples of that. So in my smaller organization, we recently went in 2 years, we went from 3 part-time staff to 5 part-time staff, which doesn't seem like a lot, but we'd kind of just been operating at the same level of like very informal. If we need a meeting, we'll have a meeting. If we need to talk, we'll just jump on a chat. And now we had 2 more people in the mix, and we realized that communication wasn't going as well. And all of a sudden someone said, do you think we need to have staff meetings now? It was just this aha moment of like, but we're so small, we're so tiny, we can just know how we need to call. But it really emphasized, and it was a simple solution. We all just needed to say, yeah, we need to have just monthly staff meetings now. Another example is in VMAP, we went again growing from a small organization where the folks who were involved could probably fit around a conference room table to now we've got over 100 folks. And as we've grown, some of the people who were involved from the beginning were really used to being able to come to myself or our senior director to answer questions. And now as our team has grown, the who do I go to for what questions have really changed. And so continuing that communication of, who's the best person to answer this question, or what should I do if I have a concern or a challenge, and really clarifying that. I love decision frameworks, and using decision frameworks. There's some like RACI is one, MOCA is another, and you can talk about who's responsible for this, who approves this, who's just consulted, who's informed, and really having those mindful discussions with your team about these things, because it may seem like a small deal, or it may seem like, oh, they should know who to go to or who's responsible for this, but you really do have to have those conversations, and it's helpful in the long run to clarify those questions and confusion.
Again, I think it ties back to ownership as well. It gives people the opportunity to really understand what their role is, and I think in these shared leadership models, understanding what is expected of you and like what your role actually is and what you have control over or autonomy over is really crucial in those spaces. And then just on the idea of shared communication, I forgot to mention earlier that if you guys have any questions, anybody listening to the discussion, please by all means ask the panelists. We'll be happy to incorporate those questions in as best as possible. But so if there's any questions, please just include them in the chat. Sorry, and then I'm going to hand it over to Kamilah. I just wanted to get that in there before I handed it over.
No problem. So I think you both touched on a lot of things that I had kind of written down in my notes here. So even with the last question, I had written down perfectionism, and that has come up now, that, we don't need to be perfect, and just kind of this, sometimes with that like non-shared leadership model, it's like everything needs to be perfect before we release it. But like being able to know that we can put things out there and adjust and tweak as needed, and we don't have to wait till a program is like perfect and ready to go and can be perfectly executed before putting it out there. The other thing that I kind of jotted down was like trust and transparency. And so on the internal culture, what I find is that when you have shared leadership, shared decision making, where everyone's voice kind of has come up already, is valued and feels like their voice, they have an opinion and it will actually be taken into account, and it won't just be we shared it but they're actually not listening. That's where we get that trust. We feel like our leadership is being transparent, because obviously sometimes as leaders not everything can go out to everyone all the time or at the same time necessarily, but there's a level of transparency that leaders need to have to be effective leaders. And so being able to have that level of transparency, I think, is also important and has a great impact on kind of the internal culture and decision making. And I think it's also important even for leaders who are at, I guess, quote unquote, the top. But those that are front facing and facing our clients versus those that may be kind of not front facing, you think but you don't know. And so it's really important that those that are, more behind the scenes or kind of doing that other work that still needs to be done and is still very important, we really do need to hear and listen to those that are front facing and with the clients and who we serve, so that we can then, make the appropriate adjustments along the way, to acknowledge the work that they're actually doing and actually having to facilitate. We put the program plans into place, but they're actually facilitating that work. And so what are they seeing that's not working?
I think that's so crucial. The ability to pivot and be nimble in those spaces while listening to the people you're serving. And if we aren't listening to the people we're serving or the people doing the frontline work, I feel like we've missed a huge piece of the work. And I love that you flagged that, because I think that perfectionism doesn't allow for that, unless they were brought in right from the beginning and they have all the answers, which we know they don't, or we can't see kind of the challenges that come up along the way because of something that just wasn't thought about. Like that, I think, is so crucial. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm just going to jump to the next question here. Decentralized leadership often aligns with values like equity, trust, and inclusion. A lot of us have said these words throughout the conversation. But external systems don't always make it easy. How have you navigated tensions between internal values and the expectations of boards, funders, or larger systems? Rachel, I'm going to start off with you.
Yeah. So one of the things I was thinking about in reflecting on this question is the history or the expectations that a lot of people come into this work, especially if they have a history working with very bureaucratic organizations or, organizations that, for lack of a better word, were punishing, in terms of not really wanting to value people's opinions, or, the leader is the leader and this is who makes the decisions. And so it's kind of undoing those kinds of expectations that people may come into your organization or your program and say, we do things a little differently. And, maybe that's not really comfortable at first, or they're trying to undo some of those previous expectations of like, if I speak up, how is that going to be taken? And I think in our situation with VMAP, like I said, we work with a lot of external partners, and some of those partners do have very hierarchical or bureaucratic setups, and they're still working within those organizations as well. So it kind of requires them to do a little, I don't know if code switching is the right word, or just kind of cultural shifting within their organizations and working with us. So acknowledging that can be hard sometimes, and kind of continually returning to these values-based conversations and just making sure people know and understand we have an open door. We want to be collaborative and reinforcing that at every opportunity.
I love that. I'm curious too. I imagine with smaller teams, it's a little easier to play in that space of decentralized leadership. Once it gets to a larger team, it's probably a little tricky. But I am curious, Rachel, I know you have like a large group that you work with. Do you find staff buy-in also plays into that? Like, if I'm assuming that if there's somebody who doesn't really have the buy-in internally as well, that it can add a ripple effect across the board.
It can. I think that the way our organization has grown so slowly over time, it's kind of just come in waves that everybody just starts to adopt. And then the people who've been there, we've been really fortunate that we haven't had a lot of turnover with our folks. And so some folks have been with us. Our program's a little over 5 years, and we've have a lot of our leadership team members who've been with us for 4 or 5 years. And so I think that culture has really permeated. And so as we bring on new people, they're really helpful in continuing those conversations and just making it clear that like this is the way we operate as a program. But yeah, it is very hard with our larger program. It's been, I feel like, our theme of the last like 18 months is realizing some of these growing pains and adjusting, and really building up those like next tier of leaders, to make sure that they feel comfortable having those conversations with their team members, because we just can't have one-on-one conversations with all 100 people. So we need to make sure like our next tier of leaders feels just as comfortable having some of those difficult conversations.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And it ties into the importance of like training, staff training in general, and making sure that you have equipped your team with the knowledge and power that they need, for sure.
Yeah.
Kamilah, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yes. So I was thinking more along the lines of with this question. So like the boards, the funders, and for me, I think that it always comes down to like, your work will be proof enough for itself. And so if you're doing good work, if you're having the impact that you're meant to have on the community that you're serving, they'll have to see that your model is working and that what you're doing is something that we need to be continuing to do. And I almost feel like that's part of the shift towards collaborative models anyways, is that, silos weren't working. People working really separately and not together wasn't working. Staff not being engaged in the work that they're actually doing and having that buy-in was not working. And so we had to make that shift, right? To make sure that, the voices of staff at the front were heard. We had to make that shift to make sure that, that internal culture of the organization was something that where everyone was feeling valued and had that input. And so I think the work and the outcomes and kind of what we're doing speaks for itself in these kind of situations where, that's how you kind of get the board and the funders on board. Because funders, at the end of the day, they want to see that their money is doing what you said it was going to do. And so, let's exceed their expectations, pull it out of the water, and then they're going to be like, okay, it works. This is the shift that needs to be made.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think funders would be maybe a little more easy to convince depending on the board. I've seen some boards where they very much act as the decision makers and the authority. So I think sometimes maybe it's a power dynamic as well. So again, I think it has to be a trust thing and we all need to agree about this process. And if you're excelling at the work, then obviously they're going to agree. So I love those.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry. Please, go ahead.
Sorry, to jump in on like the board piece too. And I don't want to say this in like a negative way, but like we've had situations where we've had to be like, okay, evaluating our board members and being like, okay, how can we start to shift even our board to make sure that it aligns with what the work is and the values of the work. And so sometimes it comes down to like, one by one, you're kind of bringing in board members that better align and start to shift even like what your board looks like so that it matches what the work you're doing is. As opposed to a bunch of board members that, you might have that who aren't picking up on what the actual vision and what the organization is doing and are kind of shutting down the things that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've had some boards where like we gracefully had to like let go some volunteers, and it's okay to let go of volunteers. And if there's not a shared vision or value, to move forward in a productive way, I think that's exactly it. And bringing in that new generation of leaders that want to do the work in the way that the organization wants to move forward is so crucial. Thanks for that, Kamilah. Danette, over to you.
Yeah, and just to build off of that, even if your board is a give-get board and they pay to be on there, sometimes they don't align. And sometimes you have to move them out to move, people who are better aligned and will grow with the organization. And that can cause some issues, right? But it's really important that everybody is on the same page. And with me, I am one of those people that I over communicate, but that has worked in my favor with our board. They're like, we don't need to know all of these details. I'm like, yes, you do. Because that helps in the long run. And then you know what's going on. So then when someone asks you a question, then you're like, oh yeah, okay, that works. And when we started growing and, spreading out, I started doing less of the day-to-day and started, giving all of the tasks to everyone else, just so I could focus on fundraising and membership. And it actually ends up working. But, there's times where it can cause tension with it, especially the board, so you may be doing something that they're not, like everything we do is free for nonprofits at the Nonprofit Cooperative. And so they, some of them said, well, why don't we start charging the nonprofits? I'm like, no. I'm like, that is our slogan. Everything we do is free for the nonprofits. And they wanted to change that. And every so often it comes back up, it sneaks back up. And I'm like, no, we're not doing that, because that wasn't the vision, right? The vision was to provide free resources across the board. And so I don't want to go back, and say, okay, even like they were saying, just charge them a small amount, like $5, just so that, people will show up to events once they register. And I'm like, no, I'd rather have, a 30% show rate than to charge. So, yep. So it's all right to have a conflict and have some, I think it keeps you on your toes, but just make sure that you communicate. Communication is key.
Yeah. And I think there's something too about like conflict resolution and being able to have those hard conversations and not being afraid of those conversations, I think is really a crucial component as well. So we do have time for one more question, and I'm going to ask the group. And I'm really curious about this question as well, because we've kind of touched on it, but it's ensuring people are accountable. So when no one person holds all the authority, how do you ensure responsibilities are met and decisions don't stall? What's helped you strike a balance between power sharing and accountability? And Rachel, I'm going to start off with you. I'm really curious how you handle these things.
Yeah. So I think one of the things we do, particularly at VMAP, is we use our strategic plan as our guide point or our compass. It's not, as it should be, it's not something that just sits on a shelf and we look at it once a year or every time it's time for a new strategic plan. So at every leadership meeting, every executive team meeting, and then a lot of times in between, we are bringing that strategic plan out and sharing with everyone, here are some of the smaller things. Here are some of the items that we're doing that are pushing us forward. Here's some setbacks that we've had. Here's some ways that we're thinking about pivoting or changing. And I think using that, first of all, everyone in our program should know what's going on with the strategic plan and what our goals are. And so it always brings back to those conversations, but it also helps us think about where we need to make adjustments. Maybe a project's just going on too long because of, certain delays, or maybe we've refocused our priorities and this doesn't make sense anymore, or someone's got a great new idea and we want to say, hey, does this really align with everything else that we're doing? Or is it, someone mentioned mission drift, that boy, does that come up a lot. And so saying like, yeah, maybe this is a good idea, but we're putting this off until we can have some other conversation. So I think that has really helped us as a collective program think about those responsibilities and conversations. In addition, our senior director and I, we both work really closely together, and she and I meet on at least a 2 to 3 month basis to have kind of like a deep dive strategic planning session of our own, to really think about like what's going well, what are some projects that we've had in the parking lot, can we bring those back? And having that time for us to work together and think about what's going on in different parts of the organization has helped our process a lot.
I love that. Giving time for the team to really include their thoughts and suggestions, I think is really meaningful to bring everybody onto the same page at the same time. I used to work at an organization where every year, we probably did it twice a year actually, where we put all of the projects that we're working on sticky notes and then put it along the whole side of the one room. And we could see like, this has to happen during this time frame. But then if this month was getting way too full, we were able to like remove a sticky note, which felt so good doing sometimes, and then putting it into another area and bucket. And it was like, this isn't a priority right now. We all know it's important, but we're able to move it down the line and everybody felt they knew why it was happening that way. And it was just a really informed decision process. So it feels very similar to like what you guys are doing just by bringing it up so often. I love that.
I love that.
Kamilah.
I totally agree. Yeah, that's what I was going to say is strategic planning. Just keep checking in with that. Is so important. It is a working document and it should be looked at all throughout the year, just not a one time you do it and that's it. And it's a wonderful way of just keeping the communication and the goals and the timeline. I'm sorry, it's allergy season. And keeping the timeline on track also. And in addition to, checking in where people are, what are they responsible for, holding them responsible to those, making sure that everything stays on time, on track.
That's fair. And Kamilah, what about yourself?
Yeah, I think I'll echo a little bit of what you're saying around the strategic plan. Something that we do at this current organization I'm at is we have project charters. And so all of our projects, we have to start off with a project charter, and the project charter in that, one of the things we have to identify is how it links to our strategic plan. So making sure that we're not taking on things that don't link or don't match kind of what we say we're going to be doing, and having strict like timelines with everything. So we're knowing if we're within that timeline, if it is going on too long, what are the things we're going to do to mitigate that? And then I think another thing that people don't always think about initially, but is important, is tying dollars. So when we see money attached to something, it's like, oh no, money's being wasted, like the money. And so really having dollars attached to a project as well is important and helps us to see how much money that project is actually eating up financially, with the time of those that are part of the project, all those other things. So I think that's also important and helps us to kind of stay on track and keep that going along, as well as someone already mentioned it before, but having like a RACI matrix or something where we're talking about, who's in charge of this, who's responsible, who's accountable, those other pieces as well.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the dollars. It's money talks, unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever. And I think it really does tie back into like keeping the eye on the prize and what the focus is and what you can actually complete or have the energy to actually do in the time or finances you're allotted. We do have one other question, and I think it's a great question to like wrap this session up for people who are interested in learning on how to have these discussions with their organization. So I'm hoping we can take 1 to 2 minutes and everyone here can have a chance to respond to it. But Melissa's wondering, where is the best place to start in discussing and launching a shared leadership model? So I think it's a big question, but I heard a breath. Whoever wants to take it.
I think I can start. It's a great question. And I think that if you're, used to working in a program or an organization that is more bureaucratic, you kind of have to deconstruct a little bit of what your current situation is and just have some of those honest conversations with the folks who are in leadership of like, what could this look like? Bringing in some of the elements of what we've talked about today, how it really requires people to approach the work with that servant leadership model, with humility, with lots of collaboration. And then you can start thinking about, it could be a work session where you just break down your org chart and say like, how would this look different if we use more team-based structures rather than like this person supervising this person. And I think I love what Kamilah said about charters. I think charters, decision frameworks, all of those are structured, tools that you can bring to help you be less structured. And so it kind of, for those of us who are used to or want to work in a very structured way, there's lots of tools out there that can guide the process when it starts to feel a little less comfortable, or like that you feel like maybe you're going to lose control if you let go of some of these things.
Control and power. Interesting pie up there. Kamilah, do you want to add anything to that?
What I was just going to say was, I think sometimes it goes back to like the shared vision. Something I say just to get us on the same page, even like in meetings, it's just like everyone's kind of going at different angles and coming things at different ends. So, hey, again, what are we trying to do? And it's like, these are the people we serve, and this is what we do, our mission. So like that shared vision, I think, or mission is always important to come back to and kind of acknowledge as like the center of what we're doing. And then from there, I think opening it up to what can that look like. Another piece that I think is really helpful, especially if you're a really large organization, and that's kind of where I've shifted from being a small team of four people before to a large organization of over 100 people that I'm in now. And so as part of a large organization, what's been really helpful has been like our different committees, and having our different committees inform different pieces of the work. And so, having committees, we have a committee around culture specifically in the organization, and we make sure we do an annual culture survey with that. having our specific DEI committee that focuses on that piece in the organization. And we have different committees that focus on different parts of the work that make sure that we have, involvement of the staff kind of across the organization in different pieces that are then informing, at the end of the day, leadership. And they're taking that information.
I love that. And those are all such important committees to incorporate across. And it's hearing everybody's voice in those spaces is so crucial. I love that suggestion. Danette, what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Open communication, as I mentioned several times, is really important. And if you sit down with the staff and talk to them and what it could look like in the future is really important. And, just be transparent of this is how I want to see it, but then listen to them on how maybe they have a different idea of how it could work, and taking that all into consideration. And then also, let's not forget about communicating it all to the board once you've worked everything out internally.
Such an important piece to remember. I love that. Thank you so much. This was a great conversation. It's just the tip of the iceberg because I have so many more questions, but I will have those on one-on-one conversations. And I just appreciate all of you so much for taking the time to have this really interesting and thoughtful conversation with all of us. So thank you so much. We'll be sharing notes with everybody, or not notes, sorry, an article with everyone following the session. And by all means, reach out to everyone on the call here, and we'd love to continue the conversation on the Nonprofit Hive. Have a great day, guys.
Okay, thank you for having us. Bye.
Bye.